The sound of a pistol shot cracked through the clear October air, startling Delilah Norwood from her desperate reverie. Her fingers clutched the small velvet bag containing her wedding ring as she ducked behind the general store's porch pillar. Gunshots weren't uncommon in Redemption Creek, Colorado in 1876, but today, with an empty stomach and a baby on the way, every unexpected sound felt like an omen of doom. Delilah drew a deep breath and touched her slightly swollen belly. 3 months along now with no husband to provide, no family to turn to, and not a penny to her name. Only the gold band Thomas had placed on her finger before riding east to St. Louis and never returning. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, smoothing the wrinkles from her faded calico dress before pushing through the mercantile's weathered door. The familiar scent of coffee, leather, and dried goods greeted her as she approached the counter where Mr. Wilkins stood, arranging a display of canned peaches. "Afternoon, Mrs. Norwood," he said without looking up. "Mr. Wilkins." Her voice sounded small, even to her own ears. "I was wondering if—" The words stuck in her throat as her fingers worried the small bag. "Yes?" He finally turned, spectacles perched on his bulbous nose. "I need food," she blurted. "Beans, flour, maybe some salt pork if—" Delilah pulled the ring from its hiding place, the gold catching the light streaming through the dusty windows. "I was wondering what you might trade for this." Mr. Wilkins's expression softened with pity, the look she'd grown to despise over the 6 months since Thomas had disappeared. "My dear, I'm afraid I couldn't give you much. Business has been slow with the mine closing." "Anything," she said, "even just beans. Enough to last a week or two while I figure things out." Mr. Wilkins took the ring, examining it. "It's a pretty piece, but 4 sacks of beans, 2 of flour, a side of bacon, and coffee." The deep voice came from behind her. Delilah spun around to find a tall man leaning against the door frame. His dark hat shadowed his face, but she could make out a strong jaw darkened with stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. His duster was dusty from the trail, and the worn holster at his hip held a Colt revolver that looked well used. "I wasn't asking you, Mr. Xavier," she said, recognizing the cowboy who'd purchased the old Blackwell ranch last spring. "No, madam, you weren't." Jackson Xavier pushed off from the doorframe and walked toward them, spurs jingling with each step. He reached past her, taking the ring from Mr. Wilkins' palm. "But I'm making the offer all the same." He studied the ring for only a moment before pressing it back into Delilah's hand. "Keep it, and take mine too." Before she could respond, he pulled a gold band from his pocket and set it on the counter. "That should cover a month of supplies for the lady. Wilkins." Mr. Wilkins lifted the ring heavier and wider than hers, and his eyes widened. "Yes, sir. That'll do nicely." "I don't need your charity," Delilah whispered fiercely. "It's not charity if it's an exchange." Jackson nodded toward her midsection. "Word is you're handy with a needle. My place could use some proper curtains and linens. I've been meaning to make the house livable." "I don't take handouts from strangers," she insisted. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Then I suggest we get acquainted, Mrs. Norwood. I'm in need of help, and you're in need of food." He tipped his hat. "Seems providential. Don't you think?" Delilah clutched her wedding ring tightly. "Why would you do this?" His eyes, gray with flecks of blue, held hers. "Because no one should have to trade away their memories for beans." With that, he turned to Mr. Wilkins. "Have the supplies delivered to Mrs. Norwood's cabin, and add some sugar and dried fruit. Growing babies need sweetness now and then." Before she could muster another protest, he was gone, the bell above the door jingling in his wake. "Well," Mr. Wilkins said, breaking the stunned silence, "seems you've made an impression on our Mr. Xavier. I've never even spoken to the man before today." Mr. Wilkins chuckled. "Some men don't need words to see what's worth noticing." He began gathering supplies. "Jackson Xavier is a good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings. Where did he get a gold ring like that? She asked. That's his story to tell, I suppose. Mr. Wilkins smiled. But I'd wager you'll hear it soon enough if you're making his curtains. Delilah tucked her own ring back into its pouch, her pride warring with the relief of knowing she wouldn't go hungry tonight. Will you be accepting his offer then? Mr. Wilkins asked. Delilah thought of her empty pantry, the coming winter, and the child growing beneath her heart. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Yes, she said quietly. I suppose I will. 2 days later, Delilah stood at the foot of the path leading to the Xavier Ranch, a basket of sewing supplies over her arm. The October sun warmed her back as she gathered her courage. The ranch house sat nestled against a stand of pines, smoke curling from the stone chimney. It was larger than she remembered, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. The barn and corral stood to the west, where several horses grazed in the afternoon light. As she approached, the front door swung open, and Jackson Xavier stepped onto the porch. Without his hat, his dark hair fell across his forehead, and in the full light of day, she could see the lines around his eyes, not from age, as he couldn't be more than 30, but from squinting into the sun and perhaps from smiling. Mrs. Norwood, he called, right on time. Mr. Xavier. She climbed the steps, keeping a proper distance. I've come about the curtains. So I see. He gestured toward the door. Please. Come in. The interior of the ranch house surprised her. The bones were good solid timber floors, a large stone fireplace, windows that caught the light, but it was Spartan to the point of emptiness. A table and chairs stood in what must be the dining area, a settee and single armchair before the hearth, and little else. You weren't exaggerating about needing help, she observed, setting down her basket. I'm afraid furnishing wasn't my priority when I bought the place. He moved to the kitchen and poured coffee into 2 mugs. The cattle and land took precedence. What made you settle in Redemption Creek? She asked, accepting the offered cup. Quiet. Space. He shrugged. A chance to start over where no one knows your name. Something in his tone resonated with her. Wasn't that what she'd hoped for when she'd followed Thomas West from Philadelphia? A fresh beginning. I understand that sentiment, she said softly. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, a current of recognition passed between them 2 souls who had sought renewal in this rugged landscape. So, she continued briskly, breaking the moment, what exactly did you have in mind for these curtains? For the next hour, they moved from room to room. She took measurements of the windows, made notes about fabrics and styles, surprised by his opinions on colors and patterns. Most men wouldn't care about such details, she commented as they finished their tour in what would be the master bedroom. My mother was a seamstress, he explained. I spent my boyhood surrounded by fabrics and threads. Some of it was bound to stick. The mention of his mother prompted her to ask, Is your family still in? Where are you from, Mr. Xavier? Texas, originally. And no, my parents passed some years back. He leaned against the doorframe. What about you? Any family besides your husband? Delilah stiffened. My parents disowned me when I married Thomas. They had other plans for their only daughter than a life with a dreamer who chased gold and fortune. And where is your husband now? The directness of his question caught her off guard. Most people in town talked around Thomas's disappearance, as if speaking of it might somehow make it worse. I don't know, she admitted. He left for St. Louis in April. Business opportunity, he said. He was supposed to return within a month. She looked down at her hands. I haven't heard from him since. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry, she said with unexpected bitterness. But sorry doesn't fill the pantry or prepare for a baby. No, he agreed. It doesn't. The silence stretched between them until he finally spoke again. "Are you hungry? I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage bacon and eggs." The simple offer food with no pity attached nearly undid her. "That would be nice. Thank you." Over a simple meal at his kitchen table, conversation flowed more easily. He told her about his ranch, the 50 head of cattle he was raising, his plans to expand. She found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Philadelphia, her father's banking business, the society life she'd abandoned for love. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Leaving that life behind?" Delilah considered the question seriously. "I regret being naive," she finally said. "I regret believing that love alone was enough to build a life on. But I don't regret choosing my own path, even if it led me here. Here being, desperate enough to trade my wedding ring for beans," she said, with a self-deprecating smile. "Life has a way of humbling us all eventually," he said, his voice low and something like understanding in his eyes. As evening approached, Jackson insisted on escorting her home. They rode double on his gelding, her basket of supplies secured to the saddle. The proximity was improper, but Delilah was too weary to walk the 2 miles back to town, and the solid warmth of him behind her was oddly comforting. "I'll bring the fabric tomorrow," he said as they reached her small cabin at the edge of town. "Whatever you think suitable." "You don't need to do that," she protested. "I can use what Mr. Wilkins has in stock." "Wilkins has 3 types of fabric, all in shades of practical. I think my windows deserve better." His smile transformed his face, softening the hard angles. "Besides, I promised payment in supplies, not just food." As he helped her down from the horse, his hands at her waist, she was acutely aware of how long it had been since anyone had touched her with such casual strength. "Thank you," she said, stepping away quickly. "For everything." He nodded once, tipped his hat, and rode away, leaving her with the strange sensation that her life had somehow shifted course in ways she couldn't yet understand. Over the next 2 weeks, Delilah fell into a routine. Mornings at her cabin, afternoons at the Xavier Ranch. Jackson proved true to his word, providing not only fabric for curtains but material for quilts, tablecloths, and even new clothes for herself. "You can't keep giving me things," she protested one afternoon as he presented her with a length of soft wool perfect for a winter coat. "I'm not giving, I'm investing," he replied. "Your skills are worth far more than beans and fabric." She discovered he was a man of unexpected depths. He could quote Shakespeare while mending a fence, discuss politics while cleaning his rifle, and ask insightful questions about her dreams while they shared simple meals at his table. Sometimes he was gone when she arrived, tending to ranch business, but he always left coffee on the stove and a note telling her when to expect him. She would work in the quiet of his home, and sometimes, when she was certain she was alone, she would run her hands over his things, a book left open, a shirt hanging on a peg, seeking to understand this man who had inserted himself into her life with such casual authority. It was during one such afternoon, as November winds began to howl outside, that she found the photograph. Hidden in a desk drawer she'd opened looking for scissors, the daguerreotype showed a younger Jackson beside a beautiful, dark-haired woman. Both were smiling, his arm around her waist, her hand resting on his chest where a wedding ring gleamed on her finger. The same ring he'd traded for her supplies. Delilah's hands trembled as she returned the photograph to its hiding place. She'd known, of course, that the ring must have significance, but seeing proof of its origin of the woman who had once worn it made her stomach twist with something she refused to name. When Jackson returned that evening, stamping snow from his boots, she couldn't meet his eyes. "Something wrong?" he asked, hanging his coat by the door. "No," she lied, focusing on the stitch she was placing in a quilt intended for his bed. "Just tired." He studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Weather's turning bad. You should stay here tonight." Her head snapped up. That would be inappropriate. More inappropriate than freezing to death trying to get back to town? He gestured toward the window where snow was beginning to accumulate. I'll sleep in the barn. The guest room is made up. I couldn't. Delilah. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in his voice, a mixture of exasperation and concern, stopped her protest. Don't be foolish. You have more than yourself to consider now. His gaze dropped to her middle, where her pregnancy was becoming more evident each day. Fine, she conceded, but I'll leave at first light. As you wish. That night, lying in the narrow bed of his guest room, Delilah listened to the wind and thought about the woman in the photograph. Jackson's wife, presumably. Where was she now? Dead? Gone? The questions circled in her mind until sleep finally claimed her. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Following the scent to the kitchen, she found Jackson at the stove, his back to her. You didn't sleep in the barn, she accused, noting his clean shirt and freshly shaven jaw. No, he admitted without turning. I slept on the settee. My conscience wouldn't let me abandon a pregnant woman in a storm, even with a roof over her head. He glanced over his shoulder. Coffee? She accepted the cup he offered, warming her hands around it. The woman in the photograph, she said abruptly. Was she your wife? His movements stilled for just a moment before he continued cooking. Yes. What happened to her? She died. The words were flat, emotionless. 3 years ago. I'm sorry. She hesitated. Was it difficult to part with her ring? Now he did turn, spatula in hand, eyes direct. Yes and no. Rebecca would have approved, I think. She wasn't one for letting things gather dust when they could be put to good use. Even her wedding ring? Especially that. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She used to say objects only had the meaning we gave them. The ring was just gold. The promise was what mattered. And what was your promise to her? Delilah asked softly. To love her until death parted us. His gaze held hers. I kept that promise. Something in his steady regard made her look away. The storm has passed, she said, noting the sunlight streaming through the windows. I should go. Running away. Mrs. Norwood? I have responsibilities in town, she said stiffly. Of course. He turned back to the stove. But breakfast first. I won't send you off hungry. They ate in silence, the easy companionship of previous days replaced by a tension Delilah couldn't quite define. When she finally rose to leave, he walked her to the door. The curtains for the parlor are finished, she said. All business now. I'll bring them next time. When will that be? She hesitated. I'm not sure. I have some work for Mrs. Peterson that needs attention. He studied her face, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he could see right through her excuse. As you wish. But Delilah? Yes? Don't stay away too long. The house feels empty without you in it. The words followed her all the way back to town, echoing in time with each step through the fresh snow. Despite her intentions to maintain distance, Delilah found herself back at the Xavier Ranch 3 days later. She told herself it was the need for income, the promise of supplies for her baby, the responsibility of finishing what she'd started. But as Jackson's face lit up at her arrival, she knew those weren't the only reasons. I was beginning to think you'd abandon me to a life of bare windows and empty walls, he said, taking her cloak and basket. I finished the parlor curtains, she replied, ignoring the warmth that spread through her at his smile. They fell back into their routine, but something had shifted. Perhaps it was knowing about Rebecca, or perhaps it was the growing awareness that her feelings for Jackson were becoming complicated. Whatever the cause, Delilah found herself watching him more closely, noticing the way his hands moved when he spoke, how his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the gentle way he inquired after her health and the baby's. As November turned to December, her visits became more frequent. She began bringing her meals to share, and he insisted on escorting her home each evening, regardless of weather. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Whispers followed her in the mercantile, at church, on the streets. A widow, or good as one keeping company with a rancher. A pregnant woman spending hours alone with an unmarried man. The scandal of it all. "People are talking," she told him one evening as they sat before his fire, she with her mending, he with a book. "People always talk," he replied without looking up. "It's what they do when they have nothing better to occupy their minds. They're saying improper things about us." Now he did look up, marking his page with a finger. "Does that bother you?" "Of course it does. I'm still a married woman, and you." "And I what?" "You deserve better than to be linked to a woman in my situation." He closed his book entirely. "And what situation is that exactly?" "Abandoned, pregnant, dependent on the charity of others." "Is that how you see yourself? As a charity case? Isn't it what I am?" The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "Trading sewing for survival?" Jackson set his book aside and leaned forward. "No, Delilah, that's not what you are at all." "Then what am I?" "You're the strongest woman I've ever met," he said simply. "You're facing impossible circumstances with grace and determination. You're preparing to bring a child into this world alone rather than giving up. You're making a life from the broken pieces you were handed." His eyes held hers. "That's not a woman who needs charity. That's a woman who deserves respect." The sincerity in his voice stole her breath. For a moment she could almost believe the way he saw her, brave rather than desperate, strong rather than abandoned. "The people in town don't see it that way," she finally said. "Then they're not looking closely enough." He rose and crossed to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. "What do you want, Delilah? Truly want?" The question caught her off guard. What did she want? For so long, her only desire had been survival food for the next meal, shelter for the night, provision for her child. The luxury of wanting anything beyond necessities seemed foreign. "I want security," she said slowly. "For my baby. I want to know we'll be safe. That I can provide without depending on the goodwill of others." She twisted her wedding ring, still on her finger despite everything. "I want to stop waiting for a man who isn't coming back." Jackson turned from the window, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "And if you had those things, security, independence, closure, what then?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't let myself think beyond survival in so long." He nodded, as if her answer confirmed something for him. "It's getting late. I should take you home." That night, after he'd left her at her cabin door with his customary tip of the hat, Delilah sat alone by her own small fire and allowed herself to consider his question more deeply. What did she want? The answer came with surprising clarity. She wanted more evenings by the fire with Jackson Xavier. She wanted his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, his way of making her feel seen. She wanted the right to run her fingers through his dark hair, to lean against his solid chest, to wake up beside him each morning. The realization should have horrified her. She was still married, after all, even if only in name, but instead, it settled over her with the rightness of truth finally acknowledged. She wanted Jackson. And that wanting terrified her more than all the uncertainty of her future. Christmas approached, bringing with it a fresh wave of melancholy. Delilah had always loved the holiday, the carols, the greenery, the spirit of generosity. But this year, she could barely muster enthusiasm for the town's celebrations. "You'll come for Christmas dinner," Jackson said one afternoon in mid-December. It wasn't a question. "I couldn't impose," she demurred, though the thought of spending the day alone in her cabin filled her with dread. "It's not an imposition if you're invited." He was chopping wood, his breath visible in the cold air. Besides, I've never cooked a turkey before. You'd be doing me a favor by helping." She smiled despite herself. "Are you actually admitting there's something you can't do perfectly on your own, Mr. Xavier?" He paused, axe raised mid-swing, and grinned at her. "I contain multitudes of inadequacies, Mrs. Norwood, culinary skills chief among them. In that case, I accept. Someone needs to save that poor turkey from your inexperienced hands." His laugh, rare and rich, warmed her more than any fire could. On Christmas Eve, she found herself putting extra care into her appearance before heading to the ranch. She wore her best dress, a deep green wool that she'd altered to accommodate her growing belly, and pinned her hair up with more attention than usual. When Jackson opened the door, his appreciative gaze told her the effort hadn't been wasted. "You look beautiful," he said simply, taking her cloak. The ranch house had been transformed. Evergreen boughs decorated the mantel, candles glowed on every surface, and in the corner stood a small pine tree adorned with strings of dried berries and popcorn. "You've been busy," she observed, taking in the festive touches. "I had help. Mrs. Callahan from town brought the decorations yesterday." He looked almost bashful. "I wanted it to feel like Christmas for you." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to her eyes. "It's perfect." They spent the evening preparing for the next day's meal, working side by side in the kitchen. Jackson proved to be more capable than he'd claimed, following her instructions with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. As the night deepened, they settled before the fire with mugs of spiced cider. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the world in hushed white. "I have something for you," Jackson said, reaching beneath the settee and producing a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "But I didn't get you anything," she protested. "You've given me curtains, quilts, and companionship," he replied. "I think I'm ahead in this exchange." With uncertain fingers, she unwrapped the gift to find a small wooden box, intricately carved with flowers and vines. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a silver locket on a delicate chain. "It's beautiful," she whispered, lifting it carefully. "Open it." Inside the locket was a tiny scrap of paper with a single word written in Jackson's strong hand: "Promise." "I don't understand," she said, looking up at him. "It's a promise that you're not alone." His voice was low, intense. "That whatever happens, you and your child will have someone to turn to. Someone who will be there, no matter what." Tears spilled onto her cheeks. "Jackson." "You don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "Just know that the promise exists. That I exist. For both of you." She clutched the locket to her chest, overwhelmed by the gift and all it represented. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate." "Then don't say it." He reached over to brush a tear from her cheek, his touch feather light. "Just wear it. And remember." That night she stayed in the guest room again, the silver locket cool against her skin as she drifted to sleep, amid the soft sounds of Jackson moving about the house. Christmas Day dawned clear and bright. They prepared the meal together, laughing over Jackson's attempts to stuff the turkey, singing carols as they peeled potatoes, sharing stories of holidays past. It was the most joyful day Delilah had experienced since Thomas's departure. As they sat across from each other at the table laden with food, she realized with sudden clarity that she was happy. Truly, genuinely happy, in a way she hadn't been in years, perhaps ever. "What is it?" Jackson asked, noticing her expression. "I was just thinking that this is the nicest Christmas I can remember," she admitted. His smile was warm. "For me as well?" After dinner, they returned to the fire. Jackson added another log, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. "I should go soon," Delilah said reluctantly, "before it gets too dark. Or you could stay." He didn't look at her as he spoke, focusing instead on arranging the fire. "There's a storm coming." She glanced toward the window where the sky remained clear. It looks fine to me. Now he did turn, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Delilah, I'm asking you to stay, not because of weather or propriety or any other excuse, because I want you here, with me. The directness of his words hung in the air between them. She should be scandalized, should gather her things and flee, should remind him of her married state and his promise of respect. Instead, she found herself moving toward him, drawn by some force she couldn't name. Jackson, she whispered, standing before him now. I can't offer you anything. I'm still married. I'm carrying another man's child. I have nothing. You have everything I want, he interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. Your strength, your grace, your heart, if you're willing to share it. He took her hands in his, warm and calloused. I'm not asking for promises you can't give. I'm just asking for today, for Christmas, for the chance to show you what could be. And what is that? What could be? A life, together, when you're ready, if you ever are. The hope in his eyes undid her final resistance. Delilah leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest. His arms came around her, gentle but secure, and for the first time in months, she felt safe. I'll stay, she whispered against his shirt. For Christmas. His embrace tightened, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. It was a small gesture, chaste and tender, but it sealed something between them, an acknowledgement of feelings too complex to name, but too powerful to deny. That night she slept in the guest room again, but something fundamental had changed. A door had opened, revealing possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. January brought bitter cold and renewed challenges. Word reached Redemption Creek that the railroad would bypass their town in favor of a route through neighboring Silver Springs. Businesses began to struggle, including Mr. Wilkins's mercantile. I can't afford to keep you on, even part-time, he told Delilah apologetically when she came seeking work. Folks are already heading to Silver Springs for supplies, knowing we'll be a ghost town by summer. The prospect of Redemption Creek's decline sent fear through the community. Property values plummeted overnight as people prepared to relocate. You could come work at the ranch full-time, Jackson suggested when she told him of her situation. Live in the house. There's plenty of room. You know I can't do that, she replied, though the offer tempted her more than she cared to admit. Since Christmas, their relationship had existed in a state of suspended animation more than friendship, less than courtship, full of longing glances and brief touches that set her heart racing. Why not? Because of what people might say? He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. The town is dying, Delilah. In 6 months, there may not be anyone left to gossip. Because I'm still married, she reminded him. And because you deserve better than a woman who can't offer you a clean start? I don't want a clean start. I want you. However, I can have you. The raw honesty in his voice nearly broke her resolve. Jackson, please, at least think about it, he urged, for the baby's sake, if not your own. In the end, compromise came in the form of a business arrangement. Jackson hired her officially as his housekeeper, with clearly defined hours and duties. She would come each morning, tend to the house, prepare meals, and return to her cabin each evening. He would pay her a fair wage, and their relationship would remain proper and above board. It was a solution that satisfied the requirements of propriety, if not the desires of their hearts. February brought a letter that changed everything. Delilah had just finished hanging fresh laundry at the ranch when Mr. Patterson, who ran the post office, rode up with an envelope bearing an unfamiliar hand. "Special delivery for you, Mrs. Norwood," he called, dismounting with a grunt, "all the way from St. Louis." Her hands trembled as she accepted the letter. Only one person in St. Louis would write to her. Thank you, she managed, waiting until Patterson had ridden away before breaking the seal. Jackson found her an hour later, still sitting on the porch steps, the pages clutched in her lap, her face pale. Delilah? He knelt before her, concern etched across his features. What is it? Bad news? Thomas is dead, she said, her voice distant and hollow. Has been since May. Cholera outbreak in St. Louis. Jackson drew in a sharp breath. I'm sorry. He left me nothing. She looked down at the letter. His business partner wrote to inform me that all Thomas's investments failed. There were debts. The partner only recently discovered Thomas had a wife and felt obligated to let me know. A bitter laugh escaped her. He even apologized for the delay in notification, as if that's the worst part of it all. Delilah. 8 months, she continued as if he hadn't spoken. 8 months I've been waiting. Wondering, hoping he might return. And he's been dead all along. Her voice broke. What kind of wife doesn't know when her husband dies? The kind whose husband abandoned her, Jackson said firmly. This isn't your fault. Isn't it? I chose him. I left everything behind for him. I believed in him when everyone warned me he was a dreamer with no substance. Tears flowed freely now. And now I'm a widow with a child coming and not even a memory worth keeping. Jackson took the letter from her hands and set it aside, then gathered her into his arms. She went willingly, burying her face against his shoulder as sobs racked her body. He held her through the storm of grief, not for Thomas, not really, but for the life she'd imagined, for the security she'd lost, for the years wasted on false promises. When her tears finally subsided, Jackson lifted her chin with gentle fingers. You have memories worth keeping, Delilah. Not of Thomas, perhaps, but of your own strength. Your resilience. Your ability to build something from nothing. His eyes held hers. And you have a future, whatever you want it to be. I don't know what I want anymore, she whispered. Yes, you do. His thumb brushed her cheek. You're just afraid to reach for it. She knew he was right. The future she wanted was right before her, this man, this ranch, a life built on mutual respect and growing love. But fear still held her back. Fear of being wrong again, of trusting unwisely, of losing everything a second time. I need time, she said finally. Take all you need. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'm not going anywhere. The news of Thomas's death and Delilah's widowhood spread quickly through what remained of Redemption Creek. Some offered genuine condolences, others speculated about her relationship with Jackson with renewed interest. They're saying you planned to marry him all along, Sarah Miller told her after church one Sunday. That you knew Thomas was dead and kept it secret. People will say anything to make their own lives seem less dull, Delilah replied with more calm than she felt. Will you marry him, though? Sarah pressed. Everyone knows he's sweet on you. The question haunted Delilah in the weeks that followed. Jackson never pushed, never pressed his advantage now that she was officially free. Instead, he gave her space to grieve not for Thomas, but for the life she'd thought she would have. March arrived with the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing patches of mud and the earliest wildflowers. Delilah's baby grew active, kicking and rolling beneath her heart. She was 7 months along now, her body round and full with new life. It was on a mild March afternoon, as she hung curtains in what would become the nursery at the ranch. Jackson had insisted on preparing a room, just in case you're ever caught in a storm, that she felt his presence behind her. I've been thinking, he said without preamble. She turned, one hand supporting her back. A dangerous pastime. His smile was quick and warm. Indeed. But necessary. He moved closer, taking the curtain from her hands and setting it aside. I've been thinking about what you said, about needing time. And? And I've decided you've had enough. His directness startled a laugh from her. I'm not a patient man by nature, Delilah. I've been restraining myself out of respect for your situation. But now, her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Now I'm going to tell you exactly what I want, and you can decide if you want the same. He took her hands in his. I want you to be my wife. I want to raise your child as my own. I want to wake up beside you every morning and go to sleep with you every night. I want to build a life with you, here, on this land. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, drawing out a small object. I want to replace the ring you almost traded for beans with one that symbolizes a promise I intend to keep until my dying breath. In his palm lay a gold band, simpler than her wedding ring from Thomas but somehow more beautiful for its plainness. It's not fancy, he said, following her gaze, but neither am I. What I can promise is that it will never leave your finger, that I will never leave you wondering or waiting, that you and your child will never go hungry or cold or afraid while there's breath in my body. Tears blurred her vision as she looked from the ring to his face. Jackson, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. I know it's sudden. I know you're still healing. But I needed you to know where I stand, what I'm offering. Delilah looked at this man, this steady, honorable man who had entered her life at her lowest moment and lifted her up without making her feel small, who had seen her value when she could not, who had waited, patient and true, while she found her way back to herself. And suddenly, all the fear and doubt that had held her back seemed insignificant compared to the certainty blooming in her heart. Yes, she said simply. He blinked as if not quite believing what he'd heard. Yes? Yes, I'll be your wife. She smiled through her tears. Yes, I want to build a life with you. Yes to all of it. For a moment he stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then, with reverent fingers, he took her left hand and slid Thomas's ring from her finger, replacing it with his own. It fits, she whispered, looking down at the band gleaming against her skin. Of course it does. His voice was rough with emotion. It was always meant to be there. When he finally kissed her, it was with a tenderness that spoke of patience rewarded and promises kept. His hands cradled her face as if she were made of the finest porcelain, and his lips moved against hers with a reverence that made her feel truly cherished for the first time in her life. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. The few remaining townsfolk attended, along with ranchers from the surrounding properties. Delilah wore a dress of pale blue silk, Jackson's gift with wildflowers in her hair, and his mother's pearls around her neck. I take you as my wife, Jackson vowed, his voice carrying clear and strong across the gathered witnesses, to love and protect, to honor and cherish, in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, from this day forward until death parts us. I take you as my husband, Delilah replied, her hand steady in his, to love and support, to honor and cherish, in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, from this day forward until death parts us. As he slipped the gold band back onto her finger, now accompanied by a delicate engagement ring set with a single pearl, Jackson added words meant for her alone. I'll never give you cause to trade this one for beans. Her laugh, bright and joyful, sealed their union as surely as the kiss that followed. April brought new beginnings. While Redemption Creek continued its slow decline, the Xavier Ranch flourished. Jackson hired additional hands to help with the expanding herd, and Delilah transformed the house into a true home, filled with color and warmth. As her time grew near, Jackson insisted on bringing a midwife to stay at the ranch. Mrs. Cooper, a no-nonsense woman from Silver Springs, arrived with a trunk full of supplies and decades of experience delivering babies. First ones are often slow to arrive, she told Delilah one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. But when they decide to come, they don't waste time. Her words proved prophetic. 3 days later, as dawn broke over the eastern mountains, Delilah's labor began. By midday, she was firmly in the grips of bringing new life into the world. Jackson, banished to the parlor by Mrs. Cooper, wore a path in the floorboards with his pacing. Each cry from upstairs sent him to the bottom of the stairs, only to be chased back by the midwife's stern warnings. Men, Mrs. Cooper muttered as she returned to Delilah's side. Always thinking they can fix everything. Delilah managed a smile through her pain. He means well. They all do, dear. Now, let's get this baby born before your husband wears through my good nerves. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Delilah's daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought Jackson running up the stairs, propriety be damned. A girl, Mrs. Cooper announced as he burst through the door, healthy as a horse and just as vocal. Jackson stood frozen in the doorway, his gaze fixed on the tiny bundle in Delilah's arms. Sweat dampened her hair, and exhaustion lined her face. But the radiance in her eyes as she looked up at him took his breath away. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. He approached the bed with the caution of a man navigating sacred ground. Sitting beside her, he peered down at the red-faced infant with a mixture of awe and terror. "She's so small," he whispered. "But strong," Delilah assured him. "Like her mother." "And beautiful," he added, reaching out to touch a tiny hand that immediately curled around his finger. "Like her mother." Mrs. Cooper slipped from the room, leaving the new family to their private moment. "What shall we call her?" Jackson asked, unable to look away from the perfect creature who held his finger in a surprisingly firm grip. Delilah studied her daughter's face, the button nose, the rosebud mouth, the wispy dark hair. "Rebecca," she said, "after your first wife, if that's all right." Jackson's head jerked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "You would do that?" "She gave me you," Delilah said simply. "In a way, she gave me everything. It seems fitting that her name lives on." Tears gathered in Jackson's eyes as he leaned forward to press his forehead against hers. "Rebecca Hope Xavier," he murmured, "for what was and what is to come." "Perfect," Delilah agreed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Absolutely perfect." In the days that followed, they settled into the rhythm of new parenthood. Jackson proved to be a natural father, walking the floor with Rebecca when she fussed, changing her diapers without complaint, watching over her cradle with a protective devotion that made Delilah fall in love with him all over again. "She looks like you," he observed one evening as they sat together on the porch swing, Rebecca sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Same determined chin." "Poor child," Delilah laughed. "Let's hope she gets your even temper to balance it out." "Heaven help us if she doesn't. One stubborn woman in this house is quite enough." She nudged him with her elbow. "You love my stubbornness." "I love everything about you," he replied, suddenly serious. "Even the parts that drive me to distraction." The simple honesty of his words warmed her more than the spring sunshine. "I love you too," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible." As summer approached, the remnants of Redemption Creek prepared for final exodus. The railroad's completion through Silver Springs had sealed the town's fate. Buildings stood empty, their owners departed for more promising locations. "Mr. Wilkins is closing the mercantile next week," Jackson mentioned as they prepared for bed one night in late May. "Says there's no point staying open for the handful of folks still around." "I'll miss him," Delilah said, brushing her hair at the vanity. "He was kind to me when kindness was in short supply." He asked if we want to buy any of his stock before he goes. Thought you might like first pick of the fabrics and notions. She set down her brush and turned to face him. That's thoughtful of him. Jackson sat on the edge of their bed, watching her with a curious expression. He also mentioned something else, about the day we met. Oh? Said he'd been planning to give you those supplies anyway, that he knew Thomas was gone and couldn't bear to see you go hungry. A smile tugged at his lips. Said he was quite put out when I swooped in with my grand gesture. Delilah stared at him. Are you saying he would have taken my ring and given me the food regardless? Apparently so. Though he admits your wedding band wouldn't have covered nearly what I offered. Jackson's eyes danced with amusement. It seems my heroics were somewhat unnecessary. Not to me, she said softly, crossing to sit beside him. You didn't just offer me food, Jackson. You offered me dignity. You saw me as more than a charity case. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the gold band he'd placed there. I saw you as the woman I wanted to spend my life with, though I didn't realize it at the time. When did you know? She asked, curious. That first day, when you stood in Wilkins's store, ready to trade away your last valuable possession rather than beg. He brought her hand to his lips. Your courage humbled me, and when you looked at me with those proud, defiant eyes, something in me recognized something in you. What was that? A soul that had been broken but refused to stay that way. His gaze held hers. I'd been living half a life since Rebecca died, going through the motions, existing but not really living. And then there you were fighting with everything you had, refusing to surrender even when the odds were stacked against you. I was desperate, she reminded him. You were magnificent, he countered. And I knew, somehow, that you were the one person who could wake me from the sleep I'd been walking through. Delilah leaned forward to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. Thank you, she whispered against his lips, for seeing value in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Always, he promised, drawing her into his embrace. The next day, they rode into what remained of Redemption Creek to visit the mercantile. One last time. Rebecca, now 6 weeks old, was securely bundled against Delilah's chest in a sling Jackson had fashioned from the softest leather. The store's shelves were half empty, its corners dusty with disuse. Mr. Wilkins brightened when they entered, coming around the counter to coo at the baby. There's my little Rebecca, he said, beaming when the infant grasped his offered finger. Strong grip, just like her mama. We've come to see about those supplies you mentioned, Jackson said after pleasantries were exchanged. Of course. Of course. Take whatever catches your fancy. I'm practically giving it away at this point. As Delilah browsed the remaining fabric bolts, a flash of familiar velvet caught her eye. There, in a small glass case behind the counter, sat her wedding ring from Thomas, the one she'd almost traded for beans all those months ago. You kept it, she said, surprised. Mr. Wilkins followed her gaze and nodded. Seemed right to hold on to it, just in case you ever wanted it back. Piece of your history and all that. Delilah looked down at the gold band on her finger, Jackson's ring, symbol of a promise that grew stronger with each passing day. Then back at Thomas's ring, reminder of promises broken and dreams unfulfilled. Would you like it? Mr. Wilkins asked gently. No charge, of course. She considered the question seriously, aware of Jackson's attentive silence beside her. This ring had once meant everything to her: security, love, a future. Now it was just metal, empty of the meaning she'd once invested in it. No, she decided, but thank you for the offer. Perhaps someone else can give it new meaning. Mr. Wilkins nodded, understanding in his kind eyes. As you wish, Mrs. Xavier. As they left the store, arms laden with fabrics and sundries, Jackson glanced at her. You sure about the ring? Absolutely. She shifted Rebecca against her chest. I have everything I need right here. His smile, that rare, transformative smile that lit his entire face, was all the confirmation she needed that she'd made the right choice. By autumn, Redemption Creek was officially a ghost town. The last residents had packed their belongings and moved on, leaving only empty buildings and memories behind. The Xavier Ranch, however, continued to thrive. Jackson's cattle business expanded, and Delilah started a small side business selling handcrafted quilts and clothing to merchants in Silver Springs. Rebecca grew strong and curious, the light of both her parents' lives. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Jackson surprised Delilah with a special dinner after Rebecca had been put to bed. He'd cooked himself a skill he'd been secretly practicing and set the table with their best dishes and candles. "What's the occasion?" she asked, admiring his efforts. "1 year ago today, a stubborn woman tried to trade her wedding ring for beans," he said, pulling out her chair. "And I made the best decision of my life by intervening." "Interfering, you mean?" she teased, accepting the seat. "Semantics." He poured wine into her glass. "Either way, it led us here." After dinner, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Jackson reached into his pocket and produced a small package. "Another gift?" Delilah asked. "You've already given me so much." "Just a token to mark the day." His expression was uncharacteristically nervous as she unwrapped the parcel. Inside lay a delicate gold bracelet with a single charm, a tiny gold bean fashioned in exquisite detail. Delilah burst into laughter. "A bean? Really?" "To remind us where we started." He fastened it around her wrist. "And how far we've come." "It's perfect," she said, admiring how it caught the lamplight. "Though I'm not sure I need reminding of that particular moment of desperation." "Not desperation," he corrected, drawing her into his arms. "Courage. The courage to do whatever was necessary to survive, to protect what mattered most." His hand rested gently on her cheek. "It's that same courage that allowed you to trust again, to build a new life, to love me." "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done," she confessed. "Once I stopped being afraid. And now? Any regrets? Any longings for the life you might have had?" She thought of Philadelphia, of her parents' grand house, of the society life she'd abandoned, then of Thomas, of his broken promises and her broken heart. "None," she said truthfully. "This life, our life, is better than anything I could have imagined." From inside the house came the soft cry of their daughter waking from her evening nap. Jackson pressed a kiss to Delilah's forehead before rising to go to her. "I'll get her," he said. "You enjoy the stars a bit longer." Delilah watched him go, this man who had seen value in her when she felt worthless, who had offered her dignity instead of charity, who had given her time to heal and space to choose. Her hand went to the bracelet on her wrist, the small gold bean catching the moonlight. From beans to bracelet, from desperation to abundance, her life had transformed in ways she never could have predicted that day in Wilkins's store. She thought of all the moments that had led her here, the courage to leave Philadelphia, the pain of Thomas's abandonment, the humility of that day at the Mercantile, the slow blossoming of trust with Jackson, the joy of Rebecca's birth. Each step, even the painful ones, had been necessary to bring her to this place of contentment. Jackson returned with Rebecca in his arms, the baby's dark curls tousled from sleep, her tiny hand clutching her father's shirt. "Someone wanted her mama," he said, settling beside Delilah on the porch swing. As Rebecca snuggled against her chest, Delilah looked at her husband at the love and pride in his eyes as he watched them and felt a wave of gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For saying keep it, and take mine too. For seeing something in me worth saving. For giving me a life I never knew I wanted until I had it." He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his face and warmed her to her core. Thank you for being worth it. As the night deepened around them, the three Xaviers sat together on their porch, a family forged not from blood, but from choice, from courage, from love that had grown in the most unlikely of circumstances. And on Delilah's wrist, the tiny gold bean gleamed in the moonlight, a reminder that sometimes the most precious treasures come from the moments when we have nothing left to lose. 5 years later, the Xavier Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the territory. The homestead now boasted a larger house, expanded barns, and fields of wheat in addition to the thriving cattle operation. Where Redemption Creek had once stood, nature was reclaiming the abandoned buildings, erasing the town that had brought Delilah and Jackson together. Rebecca, now 5, had been joined by 2 brothers, 4-year-old James and 2-year-old Daniel. The ranch echoed with children's laughter and the busy sounds of a household in constant motion. On a warm June morning, Delilah stood on the porch, watching Jackson teach Rebecca to ride her own pony, a small, gentle mare with a white star on her forehead. The little girl sat tall in the saddle, her dark curls bouncing with each step, her father's hand steady on the lead rope. "Look, Mama," Rebecca called, waving excitedly. "I'm riding all by myself." "I see you, sweetheart," Delilah called back, her heart swelling with pride. "You're doing wonderfully." Jackson glanced up, catching her eye across the yard. Even after all these years, that look full of love and shared joy still made her breath catch. James tugged at her skirts, demanding attention. "Mama, when can I have a pony?" "When you're as old as your sister," she replied, ruffling his sandy hair. "For now, you can practice on the wooden one your father made." He pouted momentarily before racing off to the play area where his beloved hobby horse waited. Daniel, still unsteady on his feet, toddled after his brother with determined concentration. Delilah watched them go, marveling at how her life had filled with such abundance. From that desperate day when she'd been willing to trade her wedding ring for mere sustenance, to this, a home overflowing with love, security, and the happy chaos of family. That evening, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, she and Jackson sat together on the porch swing that had become their nightly ritual. His arm around her shoulders, her head against his chest, they watched the fireflies begin their summer dance across the fields. "I had a letter from Mr. Wilkins today," she mentioned, her fingers absently tracing patterns on his palm. "He's doing well in Denver. Says the city is growing so fast he can hardly keep up." "Good for him," Jackson replied. "Man deserves some prosperity after all those years in Redemption Creek." "He sent something with the letter." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "Said it was time it came back to me." Jackson watched as she opened the pouch and tipped its contents into her palm. Thomas's wedding ring glinted in the lantern light, a circle of gold that had once defined her life. "He kept it all this time," she said softly. "Said no one ever wanted to buy it, and he couldn't bring himself to melt it down." "What will you do with it?" Jackson asked, his voice carefully neutral. Delilah studied the ring, turning it in her fingers. Once, it had represented everything she thought she wanted: love, security, a future. Now it was just metal, empty of the meaning she'd once invested in it. "I thought I might have it made into something for Rebecca," she said after a moment. "A locket, perhaps, or a brooch she could wear when she's older. Not as a reminder of Thomas, but as a symbol of how far we've come. How something that once seemed so important can be transformed into something new." Jackson's arm tightened around her. "I think that's a fine idea." She slipped the ring back into its pouch and tucked it away. "It's strange to think how different our lives might have been if I hadn't gone into the mercantile that day. If you hadn't been there at that exact moment." "I don't believe in coincidence," Jackson said, his voice low and thoughtful. I think some things are meant to be, even if the path to them isn't what we expect. Like a desperate widow trying to trade her wedding ring for beans? Like a lonely rancher finding his heart again in the courage of a woman who refused to be defeated. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the gathering dusk. I never told you this, but I almost didn't go into town that day. Had no real reason to. Something just pushed me, like I needed to be there. Divine intervention? She teased gently. Maybe. He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that still made her heart skip. Or maybe just the universe conspiring to give two broken people a second chance. Either way, she said, leaning up to kiss him softly. I'm grateful. As night fell fully around them, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms and the quiet contentment of a life well lived. From inside the house came the soft sounds of their children dreaming. Beyond the yard stretched the ranch that had grown from Jackson's vision and Delilah's determination. And between them flowed the love that had begun with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy who had looked at a desperate woman and said, "Keep it, and take mine too." In that moment, as on countless others over the past 6 years, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that she had found something far more precious than security or survival. She had found home. She had found purpose. She had found a love strong enough to transform the broken pieces of her past into the foundation of a future more beautiful than she could have imagined. And it had all begun with beans.